cold did not feel like death, it felt like absence, an absolute suffocating void where sensation should have been. Commander Elias Vance knew this sensation intimately, or at least a part of him did. A fragment of his consciousness drifted in the pitch-black digital sea of the cryostasis matrix, untethered from time, weight, or warmth. He had no body here. No eyes to see the dark, no ears to hear the hum of the ship's reactor. There was only the faint, ghostly whisper of binary code, a metronome counting seconds that felt like centuries. Then a pinprick of light, not visual but conceptual. A system prompt, ancient and rusted with 13 millennia of dormancy, flickered to life in the back of his mind. Initiating Thaw Protocol. Warning, cryogenic cell integrity at 4%, neural link degradation critical. Pain was the first thing to return. It lanced through his veins like liquid fire, a searing agony that attacked every nerve ending simultaneously. His heart, a muscle that had been perfectly still for over 13,000 years, spasmed violently. He tried to gasp, but the nutrient gel filling his lungs refused to yield. He was drowning in the very fluid that had kept him alive. Mechanical tendrils moved in the darkness, cold metal piercing the gel. They gripped his limbs, dragging him upward. The gel drained with a sickening slurp, and suddenly stale, metallic, recycled air rushed into his throat. Vance collapsed onto the grated floor of the cryopod, his muscles seizing, his vision a blur of blinding emergency lights. He vomited the residual gel onto the deck, his body convulsing with the violent rejection of wakefulness. For a long, agonizing minute, he could do nothing but breathe. In, out, in, out. The simple mechanics of life felt like a Herculean effort. As the searing pain in his nerves dulled to a throbbing ache, Vance pushed himself onto his hands and knees. The deck plating beneath his palms was ice cold, vibrating with a deep subsonic hum. He blinked away the stinging tears, trying to force his eyes to focus. He was in the med bay of the UHS Olympia *, his ship. The skeletal remains of cryopods lined the walls, their glass shattered, their interiors dark, empty. "Computer," Vance croaked, his vocal cords tearing like dry paper. "Status report." The ship's AI, Aria, didn't respond with her usual smooth, feminine cadence. Instead, a burst of distorted, garbled static erupted from the overhead speakers, followed by a fragmented text readout on the nearest flickering monitor. Reactor nominal low power, hull 78% integrity. Crew complement 1 life support minimal. The word hit him harder than the cryo sickness. He was the only one left. Vance slowly stood up, his knees buckling under his own weight. He gripped the edge of the empty pod next to his knuckles turning white. Inside lay a desiccated corpse still strapped to the padding. The uniform was recognizable, Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen, but she was nothing but bone and dust now. The stasis had failed for her and for everyone else. 13,000 years. The number was a mathematical abstraction, too massive for his fractured mind to truly comprehend. He remembered the battle, the retreat into the uncharted nebula, the order to sleep. But the gap between that moment and this one was an abyss. Vance stripped off his frozen cryogear, his movements clumsy and stiff. He stumbled through the dark corridors of the Olympia *, trailing a hand along the bulkhead for balance. The ship was a tomb. The once pristine white walls were stained with streaks of oxidized copper and mold. The air recyclers were working at a fraction of their capacity, filling the air with the stale scent of ancient dust and decay. He reached the bridge. The heavy blast doors were jammed halfway open, requiring him to turn sideways to squeeze through. The main viewport, a massive panoramic sheet of reinforced transparent aluminum, was covered in a thick layer of frozen particulate matter. Vance ignored the navigation consoles for a moment and walked to the viewport. He took his sleeve and wiped away the grime. His breath caught in his throat. There was no starfield, there was no nebula. There was only a colossal, spiraling vortex of absolute blackness, ringed by a searing halo of violently accelerated matter. A supermassive black hole. It dominated the view, a monolithic tier in the fabric of reality, pulling light into its maw with lazy, irresistible gravity. They hadn't just slept. They had drifted. 13 millennia of silent, unguided drifting through the void until the asterisk Olympia had been caught in the gravitational grip of a leviathan. Vance turned back to the consoles. He wiped the grime from the captain's terminal and tapped the power switch. The screen flickered, casting a sickly green glow over his haggard face. He pulled up the ship's log, scrolling past the automated distress beacons that had stopped transmit. 12,000 years ago due to power conservation protocols. He needed to know where he was. He initiated a long-range sweep, waiting in the suffocating silence as the dish antenna rotated on the exterior hull. Seconds stretched into minutes. Finally, the console pinged. It had found something, not a distress signal, not a comm relay. It was an active, high-frequency data stream originating from a massive structure in a stable orbit just outside the black hole's accretion disk. An orbital station. Vance frowned, his mind racing. According to Earth's stellar cartography, ancient stellar cartography, there was nothing out here. No colonies, no outposts, nothing. Whoever built that station had done so long after the asterisk Olympia went dark. He tried to access the data stream, but it was heavily encrypted, utilizing algorithms that his military-grade wetware couldn't even begin to parse. It was entirely alien. The realization struck him like a physical blow. He was not in human space. He might not even be in the Milky Way anymore. Humanity had been sleeping while the galaxy, perhaps the universe, had moved on without them. Vance looked at the skeletal remains of his pilot in the chair next to the navigation console. He looked at the black hole outside. He looked at his own hands trembling from cryoneuropathy. He was a relic, a fossil, a ghost from a dead era. But he was awake and he was human. If you're enjoying this journey into the deep unknown so far, take a quick second to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment down below with your best theory on who built that station. Your support helps bring these epic stories to life, and trust me, you're going to want to know what happens next. Vance forced himself into the pilot's seat. The leather was cracked, the padding disintegrating into dust at his touch. He didn't have the crew to run the asterisk Olympia properly, but he didn't need a full crew to fly. He just needed to get closer. The ship's thrusters were running on fumes, but the gravitational well of the black hole was doing half the work for him, pulling the asterisk Olympia along a slow, decaying orbital path toward the station. As the distance closed, the details of the structure resolved on the main screen. It was breathtakingly alien, yet eerily familiar. It was built in a ring shape, miles in diameter, constructed from a matte black material that seemed to absorb the light of the accretion disk rather than reflect it. But the architecture, the angular supports, the modular design, the placement of the docking clamps, it looked like something a human engineer might sketch on a napkin, pushed to an extremis scale. Vance brought the asterisk Olympia alongside the station, relying on automated proximity thrusters to guide the decayed warship into an open hangar bay. The landing gear groaned in protest as the ship touched down on the deck, the sound echoing through the empty vessel like a death rattle. He suited up. The only EVA suit that hadn't degraded to uselessness was his own command armor. It was bulky, designed for zero-G infantry command, not exploration, but the SEALs held. He checked the charge on his sidearm, a standard-issue rail pistol, and attached it to his thigh. He didn't know what to expect, but 13,000 years of isolation had taught him the value of caution. The airlock cycled with a grinding whine. When the outer door opened, Vance stepped onto the station's deck. There was gravity here, roughly 0.8 gs, pulling him downward. The air was breathable, heavy with the scent of ozone and recycled carbon. The hangar was massive, easily capable of housing a dozen capital ships, but the Olympia was the only vessel present. Vance walked toward the inner blast doors. As he approached, they slid open silently, sensing his presence. He stepped into a corridor that stretched for miles, illuminated by soft, bioluminescent strips running along the floor. The walls were smooth, organic, almost as if grown rather than manufactured. He walked for what felt like hours. The silence was deafening. There were no maintenance drones, no bustling alien crews, no sounds of machinery. Just the soft hum of the station's life support and his own breathing. Then he found the murals. They began suddenly, carved into the organic walls with microscopic precision. Vance stopped, his heart pounding against his ribs. He activated his suit's helmet light, casting a beam over the stone-like surface. His blood ran cold. The first mural depicted a fleet of ships. They were blocky, utilitarian, bristling with weapon batteries. They were human ships, old human ships, pre-war designs, but they were not the victors in this carving. They were fleeing, streaming away from a central point in the image, pursued by massive, serpentine forms that seemed to warp the space around them. The next mural showed the human ships arriving at a binary star system. They were met by Anot. Her species, tall, slender figures with elongated limbs and too many joints. The humans and the aliens were interacting, trading, building. Vance traced a gloved finger over the carving of a human shaking the hand of one of the tall aliens. His mind struggled to process the implications. Before the war with the synthetics, before the United Human Systems even existed, there had been first contact. History had no record of this. Earth's archives were pristine, detailing every leap from the combustion engine to the slip drive. There was never any mention of an alien species. He moved to the next mural. The tone shifted drastically. The serpentine entities had found the binary system. The battle was depicted in chaotic, violent strokes. The tall aliens were dying, their sleek ships were shattered, and in the center of the mural, the humans were standing in front of the aliens, their blocky ships forming a defensive line. Humanity was acting as a shield. The fourth mural was the most haunting. The tall aliens were gone, their planet shattered into asteroids. The humans were alone, facing the serpentine horde. At the head of the human fleet was a single, massive ship, larger than the rest, emitting a wave of light that seemed to push back the darkness. Vance stared at the carving of that ship. He knew that profile. He had studied it in military history classes. It was the Asterisk Olympia Asterisk, not his Olympia Asterisk. His was a Meridian-class heavy cruiser. This was the Asterisk First Olympia Asterisk, the prototype, the ship that had vanished during the initial testing of the first slip drive 300 years before the war with the synthetics even began. It suddenly made sense. The test had gone wrong. The Asterisk First Olympia hadn't just jumped to the edge of the solar system. It had jumped across the galaxy, maybe to another galaxy entirely. And they had found allies and enemies. "Who are you?" Vance whispered into the silence of the corridor. "You are Commander Elias Vance." The voice didn't come from the walls. It came from directly behind him. Vance spun around, his hand dropping to his rail pistol. Standing there less than 10 feet away was a figure. It was not one of the tall, slender aliens from the mural. It was humanoid. It wore a cloak of shimmering, liquid-like fabric that seemed to shift colors in the dim light, but the face beneath the hood was unmistakably human. It was a woman. Her eyes were a piercing, luminescent silver, and her skin held a faint, translucent quality as though she were made of frosted glass. She looked at him with an expression of profound, ancient sorrow. "Don't," she said softly, raising a hand. "The weapon will not work here, and I am not your enemy." Vance kept his hand on the grip, his finger resting lightly on the trigger guard. His heart was hammering so hard he was sure she could hear it through his armor. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice tight. "How do you know my name?" "I know your name because I built the cryopod that kept you alive," she replied. Her voice was melodic but carried a heavy weight like a bell struck underwater. "I know your face because I have watched over your ship for 6,000 years, waiting for the signal to wake you." "Waiting for who?" Vance asked, his eyes narrowing. "Aria, the ship's AI." The woman smiled, a sad, fragile expression that didn't reach her silver eyes. "Aria was a tool, a limited digital construct meant to manage the stasis. I am what was left when the tool was no longer enough. Vance felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. You're an AI. I am a consciousness, she corrected gently, uploaded from a biological mind long before your ancestors built their first slip drive. My name was Elara. I was the chief engineer of the *First Olympia*. The words hit him like a sledgehammer, an uploaded human mind. The technology didn't exist in his time. It was theoretical, a sci-fi concept debated in academic halls. Yet here she was, standing in front of him, a ghost from an era that predated human recorded history. The Murals, Vance said, slowly lowering his hand from his weapon, though his muscles remained coiled. That's what happened to you, to the first crew. Yes, Elara said, turning to look at the carving of the battle. We jumped too far. We found the Vellari. We traded knowledge. We thought we were safe. But the abyssal swarm followed our slip trail. They are drawn to the energy signatures of advanced civilizations. They consume everything. And humanity fought them. We were the only ones who could, Elara said, turning back to him. The Vellari were philosophers, artists, architects. They built this station, a monument to their survival, but they could not fight. Humanity has always had a talent for war. We protected them. We held the line while the Vellari evacuated their homeworld. But you lost, Vance said, looking at the shattered planet in the mural. We lost, Ev. Everything, Elara whispered. The fleet was destroyed. The first Olympia was torn apart. I was dying. The Vellari offered me a choice. They had the technology to transfer a mind into a synthetic substrate. They uploaded me into this station's mainframe to preserve me, to keep the knowledge of both our species alive. I am the last of the Vellari's memory and the last of the first crew. Vance looked around the vast, empty corridor. If you've been here for thousands of years, why wake me now? My ship is dead. I'm one man. What possible use could I be against a threat that wiped out an entire fleet? Elara walked past him, her footsteps making no sound on the organic floor. Follow me, Commander. There is something you need to see. Vance hesitated for a fraction of a second, then followed. He had nowhere else to go. The Olympia was a tomb, and the black hole outside ensured he wasn't leaving this system anytime soon. They walked deeper into the station, passing through enormous chambers filled with strange, crystalline technology. Finally, they arrived at the core. It was a massive spherical room, the walls covered in the same bioluminescent lights, but here they pulsed with a frantic, erratic rhythm like a panicked heartbeat. In the center of the room sat a pedestal, and on the pedestal rested a small, intricately woven sphere of black metal. It looked like a tangled knot of shadows absorbing the light around it. Vance felt a sudden, intense wave of nausea just looking at it. His instincts, honed by years of combat, screamed at him to run. It felt wrong. It felt like the serpentine entities from the mural. What is that? He asked, stopping at the edge of the room. A seed, Elara said, standing next to the pedestal. She didn't touch it. Dropped by the swarm during the final battle. It fell into the gravitational well of the black hole and has been trapped here ever since, caught in the event horizon's grip. It has been slowly feeding on the Hawking radiation, growing for 13,000 years. Growing into what? A beacon, Elara said, her silver eyes fixing on him. When it reaches critical mass, it will send a signal across the universe. A dinner bell for the swarm. They will come here, billions of them, to consume whatever they find. And do you know what they will find, Commander? Vance looked at the seed, then back at her. The realization was a cold pit in his stomach. Earth, the signal will reach human space. Humanity spread across the stars while you slept, Elias, Elara said softly. We have watched them from afar. They built a grand civilization. They are vibrant, noisy, brilliant, and utterly defenseless against the swarm. The seed will reach critical mass in 72 hours. Why can't you destroy it? Vance asked, stepping into the room despite every fiber of his being telling him not to. You control this entire station. You have Vellari technology. Elara closed her eyes, and when she opened them, a tear of liquid light traced down her translucent cheek. The Vellari were architects, Elias, builders. Their technology is designed to create, to sustain, to nurture. It recoils from destruction. I have tried to vaporize it, to crush it, to eject it into the black hole. The station's systems refuse to execute the commands. The seed is wrapped in a quantum entanglement field that paralyses Vellari tech. I am a prisoner in my own home, forced to watch the countdown to your species' extinction. Vance stared at her. The sheer scale of the tragedy was almost comical. He had woken up after 13,000 years, completely alone, only to be handed the responsibility of saving humanity from an apocalyptic threat he couldn't even begin to understand. You said the Vellari tech can't destroy it, Vance said, his voice dropping into the calm, measured tone he used in combat. The panic was still there, but he shoved it down, locking it away in a mental box. But human tech isn't Vellari tech. Elara looked at him, a flicker of something resembling hope crossing her ancient features. What are you saying? The Olympia asterisk, Vance said, turning to look back toward the hangar. She's an old model, pre-war. Her systems are analog, electromagnetic, kinetic. There's no quantum entanglement, no smart matter. She's a brute, a sledgehammer. You want to use your ship to destroy the seed? Elara asked, her voice trembling. Elias, the seed is generating a localized distortion field. Even if your weapons could fire, the projectiles would be deflected. You would have to get inside the field. How close? Physical contact. The seed would have to be introduced to a massive, uncontrolled energy discharge directly against its core. A controlled explosion won't work. It has to be chaotic, overwhelming. Vance's mind raced. The Olympia S main reactor was a fission-fusion hybrid. It was old, it was unstable, and it was prone to cascading meltdowns if the magnetic containment F. Yields were deliberately misaligned. It was a design flaw that had been fixed in later models. I can do it, Vance said. It wasn't a boast. It was a statement of fact. I can crash the Olympia into the seed and overload the reactor manually. Elara shook her head slowly. The station's hangar clamps are engaged on your ship. They are automated to prevent any vessel from leaving. I told you I am a prisoner. I cannot override my own systems. Vance felt a spark of frustration. Then what's the point of all this? Why wake me up just to tell me it's impossible? I didn't wake you to tell you it was impossible, Elara said, stepping close to him. She reached out and placed a hand against the visor of his helmet. Even through the glass, Vance felt a faint, warming tingle. I woke you because the clamps are controlled by the station's primary power junction located in the deep engineering bay. It is a physical system heavily shielded, but it can be severed. I cannot sever it because the action is classified as destructive by my core programming. But you. You are human, you have no such limitations. Vance looked into her silver eyes. He saw the weight of 13,000 years of loneliness in them. She had watched civilizations rise and fall. She had guarded a terrible secret. And now she was asking a frozen soldier to do what an immortal machine could not. Show me the way, Vance said. Elara led him through a labyrinth of service tunnels and maintenance shafts that bypassed the main corridors. The station's architecture here was raw, exposed. Thick bundles of organic cabling pulsed with faint light, carrying energy and data to the far reaches of the ring. They arrived at a massive circular door, seamless and imposing. Beyond this door is the primary power nexus, Elara said. The clamps holding your ship are powered by a direct feed from the black hole's accretion disk. The conduit is 3 feet thick. Your rail pistol won't cut it. Vance knelt down, examining the edge of the door. There was no handle, no control panel. How do I get in? I can open the door, Elara said. But once you are inside, the room will seal. The environment inside the Nexus is highly radioactive, and the magnetic fields will scramble your suit's comms. You will be completely cut off from me. Vance checked his suit's Geiger counter. The radiation shielding was military grade, but she was right. It wouldn't last long in a direct feed from a black hole. He had maybe 20 minutes before the dose became lethal. In 20 minutes, Vance muttered. He looked at the door. How far is the conduit from the entrance? 50 meters. It was doable. Cut the conduit, get back to the Olympia asterisk, initiate the crash sequence. Simple, brutal, human. Open it, Vance said. The door slid open with a hiss of pressurized air. Beyond it was a cavernous space filled with a blinding, pulsing violet light. The air shimmered with heat. In the center of the room, suspended by invisible forces, was a column of pure, roiling energy drawn directly from the maw of the black hole outside. It was beautiful in a terrifying, primal way. It was the raw power of the cosmos, harnessed and tamed. Vance stepped inside. The door shut behind him with a final, echoing clang. Instantly, his suit's displays went haywire. The HUD flickered, compasses spun wildly, and the audio was replaced by a high-pitched whine. He was blind, deaf, and alone. He relied on his eyes. The conduit he needed to sever branched off from the main energy column, running along the floor toward the hangar bay. It was exactly as Elara had described, a 3-foot-thick bundle of crystalline cables, encased in a hardened resin. He walked toward it, fighting the resistance of the magnetic fields. Every step felt like walking through wet concrete. His muscles burned with the effort. The heat was suffocating, sweat pouring down his face, stinging his eyes. He reached the conduit. He drew his rail pistol. He knew the pistol wouldn't cut it, but the pistol wasn't the weapon. He ejected the magazine, revealing the high-capacity capacitor that powered the electromagnetic accelerator. He pried the capacitor out with his fingers, tearing the wiring loose. He then took a length of spare copper cabling from his suit's repair kit and wired the capacitor directly to the pistol's firing coil, bypassing all safety limiters. He had created a crude, directional electromagnetic pulse grenade. It wouldn't destroy the conduit, but it would overload the crystalline matrix, causing a catastrophic thermal fracture. He placed the jury-rigged device against the resin casing. He took a breath. His hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the radiation beginning to seep through his suit's shielding. His skin felt like it was sunburned, tight, and painful. He activated the trigger and dove behind a nearby support strut. The device didn't explode. It imploded, sucking in the surrounding air for a split second before releasing a blinding flash of blue light. A shockwave of raw electromagnetic force slammed into the conduit. The crystalline cables screamed, a high-pitched, synthetic shriek that vibrated in Vance's bones. The resin casing cracked, then shattered. The cables inside flared white-hot, melting and fusing together before snapping completely. The column of violet energy in the center of the room flickered violently, then stabilized, rerouting itself away from the broken line. The hanger clamps were dead. Vance pulled himself up from behind the strut. His suit was warning him of critical radiation exposure. He had maybe 5 minutes before his nervous system began to shut down. He turned and ran back toward the door. It didn't open. He slammed his fist against the seamless metal. He was trapped. Elara had said she couldn't open it from the outside because of her programming. He was going to die in here, having accomplished nothing but cutting a wire. He slumped against the door, his vision blurring. The edges of his sight were turning black. The radiation was eating him alive from the inside. He thought of Earth. He thought of the blue skies, the oceans, the sound of laughter in a world that didn't know it was about to end. He had failed. Then the door shuddered. A spark of silver light danced across the seam. The metal groaned, warped, and began to bend outward. Elara was trying to force it open, but it wasn't her programming stopping her. It was the physical locks magnetically sealed. Vance pushed himself to his feet. He couldn't give up, not now. He drew his combat knife, a simple piece of high-carbon steel, and jammed it into the warped seam of the door. He used the knife as a lever, throwing his entire failing weight against it. His muscles tore, his vision went white with pain, but he pulled. With a deafening screech of tearing metal, the door ripped open just enough for him to squeeze through. He fell onto the cool floor of the corridor, the radiation alarms on his suit blaring a continuous, monotonous death knell. Elara was standing there, her holographic form flickering wildly. "You did it," she breathed. "The clamps are offline, but Elias, your body, the radiation." "I know," Vance rasped. Blood was dripping from his nose, his ears. He could taste copper, his legs were numb. "Help me to the ship." Elara reached out, but her hands passed right through him. She was an AI, she couldn't physically interact with the world. "I cannot touch you," she said, her voice breaking with a frustration that sounded painfully human. "Then talk me through it," Vance said, grabbing a handrail and dragging himself upright. "Get me to the Olympia asterisk." What followed was a nightmare of agony. Vance stumbled through the station, guided only by Elara's voice in his failing helmet comms. Left, right, straight, every step was a battle against his own failing body. The radiation had destroyed his vestibular system, the world spun in endless, nauseating loops. He vomited blood inside his helmet, the acidic copper smell choking him. He reached the hangar bay. The Olympia sat there, dark and silent, her landing struts groaning softly. The ramp was still lowered from when he had left. He crawled up the ramp. The metal was harsh against his palms. He left a smear of blood with every handhold. He reached the bridge and collapsed into the pilot's seat. "Elara," he croaked, his voice barely a whisper. "Talk to me." "I'm here, Elias," she said, her voice a steady anchor in the storm of his pain. "The seed's distortion field is preventing automated targeting. You will have to fly her in manually." "Manual flight," Vance muttered. He reached for the ignition sequencer. His fingers were swollen, turning a mottled purple. He couldn't feel them. He had to look at his hand to make sure it was pressing the right buttons. The reactor hummed to life. The lights flickered on, casting their sickly green glow over his dying body. "Disengaging docking clamps," Vance said, his vision narrowing to a dark tunnel. "Thrusters, forward." The Olympia shuddered, then slowly lifted off the deck of the hangar. Vance guided her out into the open void, the black hole's gravity immediately grabbing hold of the ship, pulling her toward the abyss. "The seed is located at these coordinates," Elara said, projecting a trajectory onto the cracked main screen. "You will need to accelerate to maximum burn to penetrate the distortion field. The G-forces will be immense." "I won't feel it," Vance said honestly. His nervous system was already shutting down. He couldn't feel his legs. He couldn't feel his arms. He was just a brain floating in a broken shell watching a screen. He pushed the throttle forward. The ancient engines roared to life, a thundering, primitive bellow that shook the ship to its core. The Olympia surged forward, a bullet aimed at the heart of the darkness. Jar. All the viewport, Vance saw it, the seed. It was no longer a small knot of metal. Suspended in the gravitational limbo just outside the event horizon, it had grown into a massive, pulsating flower of shadow, its petals reaching out like grasping hands. The air around it shimmered with a sickening, kaleidoscopic distortion. "Distance to target 5,000 kilometers, Elara reported, her voice steady despite the impending doom. "The field is pushing back, you need more speed." "I'm giving her everything she's got," Vance said. He reached over and manually overrode the engine's safeties. "If she blows, she blows." The Olympia screamed. The hull began to groan under the stress of the acceleration. The sound of metal tearing filled the bridge. 3,000 kilometers. The distortion field hit the ship like a physical wall. The viewport shattered inward, the tempered glass turning to powder. The vacuum of space rushed into the bridge, but Vance didn't have time to suffocate. The G-forces pinned him to the seat, his broken body unable to even twitch. 1,000 kilometers. Elias, the reactor containment is fluctuating. Good, Vance whispered. He looked at the seed. It filled the world now, a monstrous, beautiful horror. He thought of the murals. He thought of the first crew standing between the monsters and the innocent. He understood now. This was what humanity was, not the empire builders, not the politicians, not the generals. The shield, the ones who stood in the gap. 500 kilometers. Vance reached out with a hand that he could no longer feel. He found the manual reactor purge lever. It was a heavy, physical switch, connected to a series of explosive bolts that would blow the containment rods out of the reactor core, causing an instantaneous, uncontrolled fusion reaction. Elias, Elara said softly, "Thank you." Vance smiled, blood trickled from the corner of his mouth. Tell them we held the line." As he pulled the lever, for a split second there was silence. Then the universe turned white. The Olympia didn't just explode, she became a star. A localized hyperdense fusion reaction detonated directly against the core of the seed. The chaotic, unrefined energy of the old human reactor clashed with the quantum entanglement field of the swarm artifact. The entanglement couldn't process the sheer, brute force randomness of the explosion. It tried to absorb the energy, tried to convert it, but it was overwhelmed. The seed shattered. The shadow petals disintegrated into wisps of dissipating dark matter. The beacon, which had been seconds away from broadcasting humanity's location to the galaxy, was snuffed out like a candle in a hurricane. The shockwave expanded outward, a bubble of pure light and heat that washed over the Vellari station. Inside the core room, Elara watched through her sensors as the blast consumed the space where the Olympia had been. There was no debris, no wreckage, just atoms scattered to the solar winds. The light faded. The accretion disk of the black hole continued its eternal, slow spiral. The station, shielded by its black hole-resistant hull, survived, though its outer sensors were fried. Elara stood in the empty bridge of the Olympia *S hangar. She looked at the empty docking clamps. She looked at the silent, empty space beyond the shattered hangar doors. She was alone again. But this time it was different. Before, she had been a jailer guarding a terrible secret, unable to act, watching the clock tick down to an apocalypse. Now the secret was gone, the threat was neutralized, humanity was safe. She walked back through the corridors past the murals. She stopped in front of the carving of the *First Olympia leading the fleet. With a thought, she altered the surface of the organic wall. Slowly, meticulously, she carved a new mural beneath it. It depicted a single, battered ship flying directly into the maw of a monster, and beside the ship, a solitary figure pulling a lever. It took her months to finish the carving. She spent that time in absolute silence, processing the data she had scraped from the Olympia *S external sensors before the blast. She had the location of Earth. She had the frequency of human comm buoys. She had the stars. She knew she could build a probe. She had the materials. It would take years to construct and centuries to reach human space, but she could send a message. She could tell them what happened here. She could tell them about the first crew, about Commander Vance. But as she stood before the finished mural, her hand resting on the carved image of Vance's face, she hesitated. Humanity had survived the synthetics. They had built a vast, sprawling civilization while she slept in the dark. They were strong now. They were resilient. If she told them about the swarm, they would panic. They would build weapons of terrible destruction. They would become like the swarm, obsessed with annihilation, sacrificing their art, their philosophy, their souls in the name of survival. Or they would simply forget. They would file the report away, label it a myth, and go back to their lives, complacent and unaware, until the swarm found them on their own. Elara realized that Vance's sacrifice wasn't just about destroying a seed. It was about time. He had bought humanity time, not just time to build ships, but time to grow. Time to become something better than the species that had fled Earth in blocky warships all those millennia ago. If she sent the warning, she would be robbing them of that time. She would be forcing their hand. Elara stood in the silent station, orbiting the black hole, the sole keeper of humanity's greatest secret. She looked at the mural one last time. "No," she whispered to the empty corridor, "not yet." She turned away from the mural and walked deeper into the station. She began to shut down the non-essential systems. The lights in the corridors dimmed. The air recyclers slowed. She powered down the external sensors, severing her connection to the outside universe. She would wait, she would watch over the void, alone in the dark, preserving the memory of the Vellari and the courage of a forgotten commander. And if the swarm ever returned, if they ever found their way to human space again, she would be there. But until then, humanity would have their chance. They would have their time. And in the silent, frozen depths of space, orbiting a monster that devoured light, a single station faded to black, keeping its vigil over a species that would never know how close they came to the edge.